Port Arthur historic site in Tasmania.
Where are they? Matt, can you see? Check. See it? They're just walking across the bridge. Oh no, they've been across the bridge, they just can't have the water.
We are on the cruise to go. Hi. Who's here?
Also, Andrew was hoping to grab them.
Yep.
You sure this is the phone?
Yep. I see people do. Yeah, tell mom to go in there. Mom can go in there. Em.
Push me.
I'm on way.
Welcome aboard the Morona for your harbour cruise. Just a brief safety announcement. Now please be aware that there are life jackets in the marked compartments at the front of the vessel as well as upstairs, and in the event of an emergency please take direction from the crew. Thank you. Now this settlement of Port Arthur of course was a notorious prison, officially a secondary punishment station, a place where they incarcerated what were considered to be the most incorrigible or incurable criminals within this colony of Van Diemen's Land. Now the general scheme of this place of course was that men would be put to hard labour gathering raw materials, and other men would be put to task making things from those raw materials. Port Arthur always had an industrial side. Now the most plentiful and most valuable raw material here was timber. Various species of eucalypts, which were described as being 150 feet to the first branch. Convicts produced anything from broomsticks to boats and ships, and this clearing we're coming alongside on your left-hand side is the dockyard, where they produced around 200 vessels altogether. The majority of these were longboats or whale boats. Whaling was a major industry in this early colony of Van Diemen's Land, so you can imagine craft like that being in big demand, and ships would travel from all over the world to hunt in these very fertile waters. A longboat is a very similar craft, but they were used to transport goods and personnel around the bays and inlets of this early colony, when travel across country was often quite difficult, if not totally impossible. But they built larger ships as well. The largest ship built at Port Arthur was 286 tonnes. She was also the largest ship built in the colony at that point in time. And what you can see sitting in one of the old slipways is an artist's sculptural representation of one of those craft under construction. And the operation at the dockyard was so they could be bent to the appropriate shapes. Up the back of that complex was a big shed where they used to cut and sew the canvas sails, as well as make up the rigging. And of course all of this was under the watchful eye of a master shipwright, the first being John Watson and later David Boy, who used to live in that white weatherboard building, one of the oldest surviving wooden buildings in Port Arthur. Now, there was never a problem with the quality or quantity of produce here. The major problem was the ships were very well built, but they were also very cheaply built. They were often sold on the open market for what would be, for a private shipwright, almost cost price. And you can understand that these private entrepreneurs were a bit upset by that. They protested through the Lieutenant Governor's Department and finally had their case heard that they couldn't compete with convict labour in a settlement like this. So eventually the dockyard was closed down in 1848, but not before they had produced 200 boats and ships, and they also used to carry out very handy and timely repairs to any ships around the coast experiencing difficulty. And it's quite a pleasant walk around to the dockyard. You just hop onto the road above the jetty, walk along a nice tree-lined avenue and you were there. I recommend take your camera because there are some lovely images to be captured looking out across the bay. The settlement you can see in front is called Carnarvon. It originally started as a few fishermen's shacks and weekenders, but it is a residential area now. But it was actually the site of their brick fields where they used to gather the clay and fire their bricks. They could make tens of thousands per month if it was necessary, and it quite often was. If you keep on, it was named as such in 1834 when they established a specifically designed juvenile prison here. It was the first sanctioned juvenile prison under British control. The average age of a convict was around 12 to 15, but the youngest of them were only 9 years of age. They were the pickpockets, the petty thieves, who came from the larger industrial towns of Great Britain. The majority seemed to have come from London and the London districts. And they were the artful dodgers, but very much the real thing. People are often appalled at the fact that they were transporting children as young as 9. The sadder fact is that the age of responsibility in Britain at this time was age 7. Boy or girl caught and convicted could be thrown into jail at that age, but the problem was it was the same jails for everybody, men, women and children. These places were grossly overcrowded, they were rife with corruption, and the thinking people of the day figured that these young people were actually learning more about the ways of crime within the walls of the prison than they were on the outside. They called these places universities of crime. Lieutenant Governor Russell was made aware of a similar circumstance with boys being transported to Manhattan and spending considerable time in the barracks in contact with established criminals. So the idea of Point Paul was born and ably assisted by his commandant, Captain Charles Booth, set about trying to change the system. The idea, of course, prime purpose was to keep the boys well away from the corrupting influence of adult convicts and particularly those at Port Arthur. They could be taught how to read and write, basic arithmetic, taught trades like carpentry, boot and shoemaking, barrel making, boat building in the early days, stone cutting. Now most of the stonework in the Port Arthur Church and Military Guard Tower would have been carved by these boys, and we assume it's the rougher work that you will see on the inside of these buildings rather than the finer work on the facings. Of course, they received religious instruction as well. This was moral reformation. They're distributed throughout the colony as they're all directed in and would become an integrated member of the society of those new colonies. Some boys certainly grasped that opportunity. Unfortunately, others didn't. For them, it was hard labour, solitary confinement, deprivation of rations, and corporal punishment. Punishment was part of Point Paul, but thankfully never to the degree that it was applied back at the main settlement of Port Arthur. As we go past this little beach, you can see a stone wall. That's where the saw pits were. And up through the bush, you can see a few foundations and footings. This is all that remains of what was quite a large establishment. Most of the buildings had stone or brick foundations, but the upper parts were made out of timber. And when they abandoned this site in the 1840s, They actually dismantled the buildings and recycled the raw materials. Problems with Point Poor was about resources and the fact that it was such a cold, windswept place. All resources had to be taken over there, and this includes water even, all the materials for their trades, rations, etc. So this almost guaranteed contact between the boys and convicts who were performing that task, and the thriving black market would grow because of that, tobacco being the main currency of course. But it's a very important historic site, the first sanctioned juvenile prison under British control. Harbour of the Dead. Looks like the fort.
Cửa biển là ra cửa biển rồi phải không? Ra cửa biển phải không? Ra ocean, the ocean. Giống như mỗi bên đi Sydney á. Cái này là dưới nhà tù của chứ mấy đứa nhỏ hồi xưa mấy trăm năm trước dưới bên đây nhốt ở đây. Elsewhere. If we were to turn this vessel about and head due south, our next landfall would be the continent of Antarctica. And at this point there is nothing else between us and that very cold place, apart from the absolutely vast expanse which is the Southern Ocean. The cliffs of Point Poor, of course, are quite prominent as well, and the boys would scramble down those cliffs and gather on the rocks out of view. They would light fires, potatoes, they'd stolen, catch fish, smoke tobacco. Thomas Lombiere, the commissariat here, stood on top of the cliff and looked down. He said they scuttled away like little crabs. If you look towards Isle of the Dead once more, and put an imaginary line down the centre of that, the left-hand side is the southern end, convicts, etc. The right-hand side of the island, the higher ground, was reserved for burial of free people. These were members of the military, civilian establishment, and members of their families. About 180 men, women, and children, and given their status, they received due burial. In a lot of cases, some quite beautifully carved headstones as well. You may be able to catch a glimpse of some of those as we go past. So two distinctly different cemeteries within the one island, the high ground for the free, the low ground for the bond. The small island was selected and named by the Wesleyan minister, the Reverend John Nanton in 1833, who described it as a secure and undisturbed resting place where those departed prisoners may lie together and await the morning of resurrection.
I think that's the prison. That's the island of the dead.
Of course, it's a death of Port Arthur, exclusive to this place.
Over there is the prison.
The death rate of Port Arthur compares favourably with the rest of the colony of Van Diemen's Land. Life was hard for all people. The difference is that Port Arthur was designed to be
Yeah, they built a whole
a secondary punishment station. Work accidents were fairly frequent. Men working in the timber gangs or the quarries suffer fatal accidents, men hit by falling trees and branches and so on. These men were wearing leg iron. It meant if anything went wrong, they didn't have much opportunity to get out of the way of falling branches and trees. Drownings were fairly common. It's a time in history when not many people could swim, and there was always a lot of activity on or around water. If somebody fell into the water, people around them may not be able to assist them. was essentially the end of scurvy. And what vegetables they didn't use fresh, they used to pickle. Pickled vegetables is very good because vinegar is good for scurvy as well. Among the women on the island, the most common cause of death seems to be childbirth due to hemorrhage or secondary infection. Once again, if that occurred, there was never active contact with these people at this point in time. Now, travelling back towards the main settlement, of course, this harbour was very safe, very sheltered, and prime anchorage. The other side of the equation was Hobart, one of the finest harbours in the southern hemisphere, and this was transport to and from Port Arthur. It is 42 nautical miles from Hobart, and it could be completed in a number of hours, and for most of the year completed in daylight. This was without doubt the easiest of all of the secondary punishment stations to supply. So this harbour was also the front gate of the prison, the interface between Port Arthur and the rest of the world. The back gate of the prison being Equal Neck, with its military garrison and line of savage dogs. The whole of the peninsula was the actual jail. It was also a source of food. They used to catch fish, never to the extent that we would imagine. The problem would be no means of refrigeration, of course, but they used to keep them cool by putting them in wooden troughs and putting kelp over the top of them, but they would have to use these fairly quickly. Also, on any given day, there would be traffic to and from around the harbour. The commandant might be travelling over to Point Poor on his duty, the doctor might be travelling over to Point Poor or another part of the settlement. You might see two longboats, one with the crew rowing, the other behind it being towed, and there would be a coffin in that. There was a burial party on its way to Isle of the Dead. Now we'll have you back on shore shortly, folks, and on behalf of crew and captain, I wish you an interesting and pleasant day. Thank you.
This is Port Arthur, looking from the ferry. This is Port Arthur. That's it. Let's go down.
Đi mấy rồi.
Lấy vào bình ly.
Ô con dơi nè.
Ngồi dưới đó đâu đã rồi không? Ngồi dưới đó, ngồi dưới đây nhìn đâu có đã.
Đến một trứng.
Nó đâu có trời mưa đâu, nhưng mà trời mưa mà ấy. À, thằng kia nãy nó thấy tàu mình nó vé vô chứ ai vô. Tự gì mà. Đó. Cái đảo đó để chôn người chết.
Nãy em mới nói em nghe con mình thấy
Thank you.
ăn một cái gì tao nghe thấy giỏi dễ. Ủa đây hứng nước uống được hả?
Thôi đi lại kia lên kia đi.
Mà lép có 3 chai nước lên một chai. Lấy 3 chai luôn. Lấy 4 chai.
Yep, this is finish of what you call this one?
Bé đó hồi đó bé không có đi tàu.
Yes, but no, with the cruise ship.
Đi ra xe.